over here is the brand new 4070 Super. And nvidia says that this 4070 Super is faster than an RTX 3090, which launched at more than double the MSRP not too long ago. So we're gonna put those claims to the test and see how good are these RTX 4070 Supers for creators. Is it worth switching? And what's the difference exactly between the Super and a non-Super? Let's go.
Looking for a cheap way to license your Windows? Check out WhoKeys through the links in the video description. Make sure to use the code TN20 to get a 30% off. Paste the license to the activation settings and you're all done. This license is for Windows 10, but you can upgrade it to Windows 11 for free. They also offer Microsoft Office 19 license. Use the same code TN20 to get a 30% off. Check out whokeys.com in the video description below.
Now, very interestingly, I actually have 3 RTX 4070 Supers, and if you stick till the end of the video, you'll see which one is the best. So what we have here is a Gigabyte RTX 4070 Super Gaming OC. Then we have ASUS TUF Gaming OC model, and then we have Zotac Trinity model. But Zotac's new model is actually a black version. They used to have a gray or silver version of this, but this, or like the super versions now, have actually a black version as well. So this is kind of blacked out, even though the back here is still silver, so they're using the same backing plate. So if you look at the cards, then we can see that the Gigabyte and ASUS cards are a little bit bigger than the Zotac card. The Zotac card is smaller. In terms of the depth of the cards, ASUS and Gigabyte are almost 3 slots, and then the Zotac one is 2.5. Here you can see the 12-volt high power cable, and it comes with a converter to 2 8-pin PCIe cables. And looking at these cards from the back, we can see that the Gigabyte card has the biggest pass-through and the smallest PCB actually. The Zotac one is long and a little bit like skinnier, thinner PCB and a little bit of pass-through. ASUS is quite long as well, even longer than Zotac actually, but still a little bit pass-through there with the TUF design. And then Gigabyte is small here with huge. The whole fan is like just going through there. Now, in terms of design, which one do I like the most? I actually like the Gigabyte card the most. I know Zotac card is the most different one because it's smallest and more like round. The TUF still like advertises a lot of gaming. What I like about the Gigabyte card is there's no like gaming mentioned on the card, but the TUF still has to be TUF Gaming here, and in little bits we can see TUF Gaming, which I'm not that big of a fan. But some of these cards are MSRP cards, which means they shouldn't go any higher than what nvidia has set the MSRP. So if you're interested in checking these out, go check them out in the description below. And I'd love to know from you, which one do you think has the nicest design? Obviously Gigabyte has these RGB designs on the actual fans as well, whereas TUF has only a little bit over there and Zotac has one this side. Now, firstly, I want to check out the 4070 versus 4070 Super. And very important thing here to mention is that when they're launching this, the 4070 is not produced anymore, and 4070 Super is the one that replaces it, which is a little bit of a higher end card. nvidia did also an interesting trick that actually lowered the MSRP of a previous card, so that these cards actually launch with the same MSRP as the 4070. The 4070 Super, what's changed, what's different? We can see that the shading units, we have 21.7% more cores, 7,168 cores. TMUs, another 21% increase, and RT cores, the same 21% increase. The L2 cache compared to the 4070 is actually 33.3% increased. The memory type, memory bus, bandwidth, everything is exactly the same. The board power though has been increased another 10%. To 220 watts. Now, if you want to check out my TESTBENCH setup, I'm going to leave the links in the description below. You'll find everything down there, as well as these cards if you want to pick any of these up. Firstly, I had to decide which cards I'm going to compare to the 4070 Super, and we want to take one from AMD. So at the same price point, we can get an AMD Radeon 7800XT, roughly around $600. And then I wanted to see how much better is the Super compared to the non-Super. So we have an RTX 4070 there as well. And then nvidia says that the 4070 Super is better than the 3090. So we're going to compare that here as well. The 4070 Super that you can see on the baseline is the Zotac version. I did test all of them in all of the benchmarks as well, like, you know, photo editing and video editing, but The results are so similar and within margin of error. I didn't add any difference in the photo and video editing applications, but you're going to see the difference in 3D, where we're going to be stressing these cards a little bit more, where we can really see which one is better. So 4070 Super in the video and photo editing applications is the Zotac model for these benchmarks here. So seeing Geekbench 6, you can see that the 4070 is actually about 7 to 8.4% slower in the OpenCL and Vulkan scores. So we're getting a little bit of an increase there. The 7800XT is about 25% slower in OpenCL scores and about 11% in the Vulkan scores. The 3090 is about 4.8% faster in the OpenCL score, but about 11.5% slower in the Vulkan scores. The 7800XT and the 3090 are both ASUS TUF versions, just so you know. Moving on to Photoshop, and this is Geekbench 0.93.7 for Photoshop 25. So the 4070 is about 2.1% slower in the overall score, which isn't that big at all. But the Radeon 7800XT is actually about 4.4% faster, and the GPU score is about 21% faster, which is quite a big increase. The 3090 again is faster in Photoshop, and Nvidia's claims don't seem to be so true in photo editing. About 1.2% faster. Bear in mind, about 2.5% I'd say is a margin of error, but I'm doing an average about 5 tests or so we can actually see what's the difference in all of these cards. For Lightroom Classic, the benchmark results will not be any different, and everything is within margin of error. So when using Lightroom, the difference for these isn't that big of a deal. But if you work with some of the higher scale photos, perhaps more VRAM might be better for you on the 3090 compared to these 4070 Supers. Moving on to video editing, and this is Geekbench 0.98 for Premiere Pro 23.6. And you can see that the 4070 is about 2.7 to 2.9% slower in the extended and standard overall scores. So not that much big of an increase. But the GPU effects there are about 9% slower in the 4070 on the extended and about 8.8% slower in the standard scores. So in terms of actually working with the codec, not that much has changed because the clock speeds and the actual encoders are very, very similar, but the GPU effects have gone a little bit faster. Looking at the Radeon 7800XT, you can see it's doing pretty much better job in almost everything. The overall score extended is about 1.3% faster, and the standard overall score is about 9.4% faster. Interestingly, long GOP score is 27% faster in the extended and 34% faster in the standard score. So basically, what I'm saying is, if you're using H.264 or H.265 media for your video editing, the AMD card is a lot faster for the same price point. But if we are looking at the raw scores or GPU effects, then you can see that the AMD card isn't as fast. So you can see the extended GPU effects are about 22% slower and standard GPU effects about 8% slower on the AMD card. So it depends which one you value more. I'd say the AMD card actually gives quite a good beating for the 4070 Super. Looking at RTX 3090, that is about 0.2% slower in the extended overall scores and about 1.8% slower in the standard overall scores. So we can see that the 4070 Super is actually faster in video editing than the 3090, at least in Premiere Pro. But you can see that in the raw extended scores and GPU effects, the 3090 is actually faster. Moving on to After Effects, and this is Geekbench 0.96. You can see that the 4070 is actually faster than the 4070 Super. And that's because After Effects, this benchmark, actually doesn't utilize that much of GPU, and the differences there are very, very minimal. So like the best and the worst GPU are probably within 10% of the overall score, so it doesn't change that much. For After Effects, any of these cards are going to be all right. But if you're wondering which part to actually upgrade for your After Effects workflow, I highly recommend checking out the podcast with Matt Bark, and we're going very in depth about After Effects and some of the hardware for that. But the 7800XT is about 4% slower in the overall scores, and the 3090 is 0.7% slower in the overall scores. The GPU score is a little bit faster though, about 12% faster. Still kind of true that the 4070 Super is faster than the 1390. Moving on to DaVinci Resolve Studio and PureBench 0.93.1 for this, and we can see that the 4070 is about 6.5 to 5.4% slower in the extended and standard overall scores. So the Super does give a little bit of a boost here, and DaVinci Resolve really can utilize all of the GPU power that you have. The GPU effects are about 10.6% slower, and Fusion scores about 7% slower, so maybe a little bit of a boost there. The 7800XT though, is quite a bit faster than the Super in the overall scores, about 9.3 to 13.5% faster in the extended and standard overall scores, although the 8K media score and GPU FX score is faster on the 4070 Super. You can see Fusion score though is a lot faster on the AMD card, and that's what I've seen. AMD cards perform very, very well in the Fusion part of DaVinci Resolve. The 3090 though, not slower than the 4070 Super, 3 to 4.9% faster in the extended and standard overall scores. The 4K and 8K media score a little bit lower though, but the GPU effects about 25% faster and Fusion about 3% faster. Moving on to 3D, and in a moment you're going to see the difference between these cards as well and how different they perform. Firstly, V-Ray. And the 4070 is about 16 to 17% slower, so that is quite a good increase now. The 7800XT is not supported in V-Ray, so we're gonna have to move on to 1390, which is about 6 to 8.8% slower on the CUDA and RTX scores in V-Ray. As you can see, the 4070 Super is faster than the 1390. Moving on to Blender, and here the 4070 is about 5% slower in the monster scene, just slightly faster in the juke shop scene, but around 5% slower in the classroom scene. So not that big of a difference for the 4070 Super. The 7800XT from AMD is about 62 to 67% slower in the monster junk shop and classroom scenes. Now, this might not seem a lot, but actually, if you look at the numbers, the AMD card is 3 times slower, or the 4070 Super is 3 times faster than the AMD card. So the AMD card gets a big L in the Blender performance. The RTX 3090 is about 15% slower in the monster scene, which is impressive for the 4070 Super, about 5.3% faster in the junk shop scene, but about 14% slower in the classroom scenes. So in Blender overall, the 4070 Super does do a better job, but it's got half the VRAM, which actually might be a lot more important to you than the actual rendering performance. Depending on your scenes and your assets and, you know, do you saturate the full amount of VRAM? Up to you. Now, I've tested the Zotac, ASUS and Gigabyte cards here, and let's take a look at the difference in Blender between these cards. You can see that the ASUS card is about 0.5 to 3% faster than the Zotac card in the monster junk shop and classroom scenes. The Gigabyte card is about 1.3 to 2% faster in the monster junk shop and classroom scenes. So you can see that the difference between these cards is up to 3%. And if you take away the margin of error about 2%, these cards all perform within 1% of each other in Blender, so there isn't that big of a difference between these cards. Moving on to Octane Bench, we can see that the 4070 is about 10% slower than the Super card. The AMD card, again, is not supported on Octane Bench, so we don't see the score there, but 3090 is about 11% slower in Octane Render. But what about these cards' difference? The ASUS card is about 1.2% faster than the Zotac one, and the Gigabyte one about the same, 1.2% faster. The Gigabyte and ASUS one perform about the same. The Zotac is slightly slower there. I guess that's the difference between OC and non-OC cards, but again, within margin of error. Now, Redshift. The 4070 is about 5.3% slower. The 7800XT is about 47% slower, which is almost double the performance on the 4070 Super compared to the AMD card. And the RTX 3090 is about 5% faster than the 4070 Super. So in Redshift, the 3090 is faster. What about the individual card difference? The ASUS card is about 2.2% faster compared to the ASUS card, and the Gigabyte is about 1.5% faster than the Zotac card. So again, the Zotac card looks like the slowest in the bunch here. In terms of power draw between the cards, you can see that the 4070 Supers pull 220 watts, and I tested it all between these cards and they all perform or like pull within 1 watt exactly the same power draw, 220 watts, 219, something like that. The 4070 is 200 watts, like they said, about 10% less power draw. The 7800XT is pulling 275 watts, the total board power, and the 3090 about 350 watts. What we can see is actually a pretty good trend. The 4070 Super is pulling less power than the RTX 3090 while performing about the same, if not up to 15% faster in the 3D applications. So if you're 3D rendering or perhaps rendering something overnight for a very long time and the VRAM capacity is not an issue for you, the 4070 Super is not just cheaper but also more power efficient for you, which just is good news. To see more efficient, you know, GPUs and faster, that's what I like to see. The AMD card here doesn't quite shine with the efficiency of the GPU, but still for the price point is very good in terms of video and photo editing applications. But for 3D, massively falls short on the nvidia, and nvidia cards are really, they are the kings of 3D. 3D rendering, whether it's Octane Bench, Redshift, Blender or V-Ray, the nvidia cards have the best support, best drivers, more stable performance, and the fastest. There's no competition there for AMD. There's a few other things about these cards. Now, AMD massively talks about AI, and that's true. These cards have some AI capabilities inside that you can do with them, but it's nothing different than a non-super of 40 series cards, right? So they're all about the same, and you can do some AI stuff. Now, it is different from the 30 series and 220 series of the GPUs from NVIDIA cards. So if you massively need AI, I very much doubt that people do need that, but in the future, it's gonna be more and more usable what you can do with these cards in terms of AI. One of the things that NVIDIA didn't include with the 4070 non-super cards is dual encoders. The sad news is that we don't have dual encoders for these 4070 Supers neither. The dual encoders are included from the 4070 Ti and then upwards. Whether it's super or non-super upwards, we have dual encoders, but unfortunately we didn't have dual encoders there. Now I want to talk about the super cards. Previously, the super card actually came also with a VRAM bump. If you remember the super cards from 220 series, it meant that we got a bit of a bump up in the VRAM capacity, but in here, NVIDIA didn't do that. Now, for gamers, perhaps that's not needed, but for creators, I would have loved to have a 16GB card of this, and then the 4070 Ti Super would have been 20 or 18GB version, and then the 4080 Super, perhaps 20 or 24GB version. That would have been absolutely ideal scenario, but there's no increase in there, which is a bit of a bummer. So then, in conclusion, are these cards worth it or not? And I'd say the good news is we're basically getting a replacement for the 4070, which is a little bit faster here. So we're getting a faster card for the same price point, which also brings down the price of the 4070 if you can find any of these out there, which might be good news for you. Now, I'm glad that NVIDIA didn't raise the price for these. They don't give you any more features than the 4070 either. Upgrading to 4070 or 4070 Super, there's not that big of a difference for creators, within a margin of error if you photo or video editing, but in 3D perhaps up to 15% faster. Now, are the super cards about 20 to 30% faster than the non-super version, what we can see on the actual CUDA cores? No, not really. Are these 4070 Supers faster than the RTX 3090? Well, sometimes. If you do want to build yourself the best bang for buck, create a PC, perhaps including some of these cards, then I highly recommend checking out the build guide in the description below. There's a build guide for any of your budgets. And also, if you're wondering, how do these cards compare with any of the other 40 series or 30 series cards that are out there, or AMD cards or Intel cards, then I've got a video in the description below where you can find all of the GPUs tested. Now, compare the results in this video to that video, and then you'll know how does these cards compare to any of the other cards out there. Go check it out. Thanks guys for watching. Bye bye.